You don't need textures, baking, or a complex lighting setup just to get a clean render out of Marmoset. If you already have Polypaint in ZBrush, you can just literally go from that sculpt to a final render in just a matter of minutes. Let me show you the simple setup I use all the time. Hey, if you're new around here, I'm Pablo. I'm a 3D concept artist and educator, and I help artists get better results with simple and practical workflows. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up a clean, simple Marmoset scene just using Polypaints to get the best out of your renders. No textures, no baking, just enough to make your character look good and presentable. Alright, so here we are in Marmoset Toolbag 5. This is the default UI. They actually have multiple workspace or setups. So if you go here at the top, you have these tabs where you can change the different workspace depending on what you're trying to do. I'll be honest, I don't really use any of those. I like to create my own and just work in a specific way. So I'm going to click on this one. And this is just going to be a very brief introduction to how I work with Marmoset, but I think it is handy. So we have the outliner type of thing, the scene on the right-hand side, and there's nothing selected. That's why there's no properties in here. But if I click on the sky, I will have my sky in here. On the right-hand side, I have the materials, and that's it. So in the window menu here, I'm just going to click on render. This is going to bring this window. You can also leave it kind of like a floating window if you want. I'm going to also bring in my library, and this is where you can grab different skies and things that you've downloaded. And Marmoset Toolbag 5 provides a lot of different really cool assets. So, and they're like free, you just download them and that's it. All right, so now that we have these two tabs or windows, what I like to do is take my render tab and just drag and drop it here at the top. So now I can switch between all my render settings here on the right-hand side and the materials as well. Now, if you select the material, you'll have all the settings for the material. So depending on how many materials you might want to just allow for a few more, real estate or more space. So I'm just going to put it in there. For the library, I like to set it up on the left-hand side so that I can collapse it. So I'm going to take the entire window and I'm going to drag it until I see the green light here. And that basically adds it onto the left-hand side. The cool thing about this is that I can hover over. You see, you don't see anything, but when you don't have the mouse over, but if you get closer here, it has this, arrow that allows you to collapse it. So I like to keep it there, and whenever I need to do something with the library, I just click on this one and browse through it, right? And I have currently selected the skies, and I'm gonna get to that in a second, but just wanted to show you the general setup. Now, all of this has been saved into a new tab, as you can see, which is the Workspace one. I'm gonna double click on it, and I'm gonna type Pablo Workspace. Oh, let's just leave it Pablo, it doesn't matter. So now I can just switch between all of these UI setups, and when I want to do the way, anything in the way that I want to, I just go to Pablo. So if you find this useful, what you can do is set up in a way that works for you. It doesn't have to be exactly the same as I did it, and just save it here or have multiple versions. You can create exactly, the same version that I'm showing you in this tutorial. So just create it with your name and then create a new one and see if it fits your needs or if you need more or less. In fact, you can right click on it and you can duplicate it so that you can kind of like start from scratch, but using the one that we just created. All right, so that's it in terms of the setup for the UI in Marmoset. I want to head back to ZBrush, which is my preferred, tool, as you probably know already, to create this type of stuff. So this is a very simple, cool, stylized guy that I'm going to use as an example because it has Polypaint and because it has a bunch of different things that I think is important to highlight. So first of all, I have a bunch of subtools. Let me increase this here. So I have a bunch of subtools here on the right-hand side. And if I select something like the body, go into solo mode, you'll see, everything is kind of like separate as well. And I have subdivision levels, meaning that if I bring in my polyframe and set this to the lowest subdivision level, this is a very basic, very simple series measure actually for the low-res mesh. But then again, I have all the subdivisions and all the details in there. Now, if I get out of solo mode, this is the full character. And I just want to show you this because I don't necessarily need to optimize anything more than this. What I see here is all I need for my render. Everything has, let's say, a smooth polished surface, and it has subdivision levels. Let's say something like the beak or this thing here also has 4 subdivision levels. So all in all, I have about 2.5 million polygons in this scene. That's great. So what I want to do is export this as an FBX. So I'm just going to go to the C plugin palette, and I'm going to go to the FBX exporter or exporter, this one right here. And I'm going to make sure that visible is enabled so that anything that is visible or whatever is visible currently in ZBrush is going to be exported. I'm going to leave the rest as it is, FBX 2020 and as normal. Just on a really, random side notes, if for whatever reason things don't work as you expect, try to change the FBX export plugin. So from 2020 to 2019 or etc. Right? But these are the default settings that work for me. And by the way, I'm using ZBrush 2026.1.1. All right, that's it. I'm just gonna go ahead and click on export, nothing else, and export this as an FBX into my desktop. I've already done that, so I'm not gonna, do it again, but this is the process. All right, so that's the only thing that you need to know about, let's say, anything before we go into the Marmoset. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and drag and drop the FBX that I exported into Marmoset, and that will import that FBX. Remember, this has 2.5 million polygons roughly, and you see, if I rotate around, it's a pretty, pretty decent performance. So don't worry too much if you have like even 5 million polygons. I've tried things or scenes in Marmoset with 10 million polygons, and still handles them pretty well. So as you can see, as soon as I drag this in, I have my character and all of these pieces. These basically are the same subtools that I have here in ZBrush. You might want to actually name them properly so it's a little bit easier to know what it is. But for me, it's just easy to go ahead and turn them on and off so that I know, in this case, these are the feathers. And if anything, let's say that the feathers are the 005, I can double click and call it feathers or feathers. That's it, right? All right, so the next very, very important thing that we need to do to set up this render properly in Marmoset, especially if it is a model coming from ZBrush, is to set up the scale correctly. So I'm gonna click on this gear icon and I'm gonna go to this show scale reference. So this is going to show me this human reference. And this is very important because now you see that my creature is kind of like, it's not even like, maybe 5 centimeters, if anything, compared to this reference file that has like an average human size, right? And this is very important because if you use something like displacement or subsurface scattering, or even like the lights behave differently if the scale is a little bit off. Now, on a side note, and this has nothing to do with this tutorial, you can just go back into ZBrush, you can go to the Z plugin palette and use the Scale Master to set the scale before you export it. I usually don't do that for this type of workflow because I want something simple that works. So for me, it's just exporting the character, send it to Marmoset, and from here, enable the show scale reference, go to the scene. So this is the next step. Go to the scene here, and I'm gonna set this to 100. That's usually a good scale for ZBrush. There we go. So what just happened is that now my reference or my character has a better size. This might be a little bit too big for what I need. So let's go back into scene. Let's set this to 50. Actually, 20 would be okay. All right, I think that would be, that would be good. All right, so let's turn this off now. So now we have a better scale. So that means that whenever we do something with, like I mentioned, subsurface scattering or certain properties of the material or the lighting, they're going to behave correctly. All right. The next thing I want to do is set up the document before we even start with the materials. And this is going to be important because ultimately what we want to get out of this is a nice render, something that we can, present or even put in our portfolio. So for that, I'm going to start with the background. So I'm going to select the sky, and we can also collapse this for a bit. So sky, and I'm going to go to my library, and I'm going to choose a better sky to go with this. Now, a couple of things that you need to know is that by default, depending on how you set up your Marmoset scene, by default, the render, if I go to my render tab here, is set to raster. So you're not going to see the true real effect of these HDR images. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the render tab, the lighting section here, and set this to ray tracing. So this is obviously going to be a little bit heavier, especially if you have lots of polygons, but you can see straight away how even this on its own, it's a really nice, simple work in progress render, something that looks clean, and that just works, right? And by the way, I'm using the shift and the right click to rotate that environment around. You can also see it from here. If you pay attention to this area that says rotation, when I press shift and right click, that's basically what I'm doing. So you can do it from here as well. The next thing I want to do is I want to change the ambient sky to color. And this is my preference because I like to render with transparency and then do the rest in Photoshop. And when I say the rest, I mean the background. All right, so that is cool. Let's go ahead and set a different color. So you can click on this swatch here, and I'm gonna go for a neutral dark color. I think that would be good. And the next thing I wanna do is have some shadow catcher. So in fact, let's actually go back a bit, and I'm gonna make this a little bit lighter just so you can see better. So you see right now, the character is kind of like floating right there. So what I wanna do now is go to the scene, go to add object, and I'm gonna click on this shadow catcher. So this is going to create this new shadow catcher plane, and you'll see it here highlighted with this sort of yellow. And it's just a plane that sits right at the, at the floor where this character is standing. And you see now we have shadows. So if I rotate my sky, now we have these cast shadows all around. You might also notice that in some cases, the shadow is kind of like cutting off at the plane, just because you would only see the shadow where the plane is. So in that case, make sure that you select the shadow catcher. and you can press the letter R in your keyboard, and that is just to scale. So you can click on the center one and you can scale it. So you see that we now have a bit more of that shadow. Now, the cool thing is that this whole plane is customizable, so you can change the fade radius. So even if you have something smaller like this, you see that it's not a hard shadow. In fact, let me just show you something else. I'm gonna press the Control and U on my keyboard. That is just to hide that kind of like UI element. And if I take my shadow catcher and go here to the fade radius, I'm gonna change that, and you see how I'm actually changing that sort of fading, and the fall off is how sharp that is going to be. So that's pretty much nothing. And if I push it forward, you see, you can clearly see with that radius ends. And so that, just makes it a little bit easier to see it. That's not what I like. I just want to show you, how it is customizable and how you can do it. So I'm just going to change that fade a little bit, and that's it. And I think that is good enough. All right, great. So if you want to see the UI again, just press the Control U, and that shows you kind of like where your lights are and all that good stuff. So I want a clean render, so I'm going to keep things simple. Control U just to hide it. Great. So now we have a simple background. Again, just because I like it, I'm gonna go for a darker color. And you still see a little bit of the shadow, so that's good. All right, so we have the background color. We have a sky that is currently lighting our scene. We are rendering with ray tracing, so basically what you see is almost what you're gonna get in the final render when you click render. So the next obvious thing would be to bring in those colors from ZBrush into Marmoset. And in that case, it's gonna be very, very simple because the Polypaint that I did in ZBrush is actually Vertex Color. So I'm gonna double click any part of my model. I'm gonna start with the body. So I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna go to the Materials tab, and you'll see we have a bunch of them, but we don't need all of them. So I'm just gonna double click again to select it, and that is 004. So what I'll do is, instead of naming every single material for every single part of the body, I'm just gonna name them body. So that's gonna be 1. I'm gonna double click the feathers, and I'm gonna click these, double click on this and name it feathers. And then I'm gonna double click the eyes, and I'm gonna click here, and I'm gonna call it eyes. And finally, I'm gonna double click on these wristbands here, or this, whatever this is. I'm gonna double click on this, and I'm gonna call them wristbands. Okay, so essentially what I've done is separated the materials that I actually want to use. So whatever there is a difference in material. So for example, in the body, it's gonna be rougher, and it's gonna have maybe subsurface scattering compared to the eyes that are just gonna be shinier. Maybe I need a different one for the beak. So I'm just gonna double click the beak. Maybe this one has a bit more or less roughness actually. And now that I think about it, we could use a different one for the horns here. So I'm gonna double click that, and I'm gonna call this one horns. And that's it. So anything else I don't need. So I'm gonna take this one, and I'm gonna press delete. So anything that I didn't name is gonna be gone. The default cannot be deleted, so I'm just gonna leave it there. So again, I'm gonna double click the body. That will give me the properties of that material here below. And usually if you do Substance Painter or any other tool to texture your model, this is where you will plug in all your maps. But because I didn't do that, I literally just have Polypaint in ZBrush. I need to just go to the albedo, and I'm gonna change from albedo to Vertex Color. So that's it. Once I do that, you see we now have, or we recover those nice colors that we have here in ZBrush, because again, this is just Polypaint. This guy doesn't have any UVs or any of that complex stuff. It's just literally painting the Vertex Color. All right, that's great. So now I can just go ahead and play around with this a little bit more. So I'm gonna double click on it just to make sure that I'm in there. I'm gonna go to the roughness, and I'm gonna push that forward a little bit just so that it's not as shiny. And you'll see that, the hands and the tail here, they're not sharing the same material. That is because if you go back to ZBrush, the tail is in its own subtool, the same thing as the hands. So when you export it, every single subtool is gonna have its own material. And because I deleted a few, it's not gonna be there. The great thing, and actually the reason I kind of like separated and simplify the materials really, is so that I can take the body and drag it into the hands, and the same thing for the tail. So now it is going to respect, each object is going to have its own vertex color. It's just that the material itself, I can control the roughness for all of those pieces at once because they're sharing the same material. All right, so let's keep it simple there. I'm gonna also do the same thing for the rest, and then we're gonna go back to kind of like more, let's call it advanced, properties of the material. So let's go to the feathers and repeat the process. Albedo set to Vertex Color, and maybe a little bit rougher. This one's right here. I'll do the same thing. Albedo, Vertex Color. This time, I'm gonna do this straight away just because it is one of the most obvious ones. I want this one to be metallic. I'm gonna go to the reflectivity and push the metalness all the way to 1, and then we can play with that roughness a little bit more. Now, when it comes to metallic pieces, and when you have like something that is not as rough, so something that is very reflective, the real magic comes from the sky. So we're going to change that, and you see that is going to change quite a bit. All right, let's do the beak here. Same thing, vertex color. And I think for this one, I'm just going to make it a bit more rougher, something like that. The same thing for the horns or the antlers, whatever you want to call this one. Yeah, I think that's good. Let's go ahead and make it a bit rougher. And I'm going to use the same material for these horns. And I'm going to drop them here in these tiny nails or claws that are here at the bottom. I forgot the ears. So let's drag the body into there, right? And finally, let's do the eyes. And this is probably one of the simplest tricks. This is purely Polypaint. And I just added that material. I'm going to set the roughness to 0. And then we have the nice sort of reflection in the eyes. Great. So essentially, we now have recovered pretty much what we had in ZBrush in terms of the Polypaint and the object, all in Marmoset, and we are ready to light this up. So let's go ahead and start with the sky. So I'm going to click on the sky, and we're going to go for something like outside. I'm going to double click this alley. And by the way, all of these ones that you can see here are things that I've already downloaded from the library in Marmoset. But if you want to filter for the things that you have, you can just go here and click on this computer icon. This is purely what is being downloaded into your computer. Let's go ahead and find something interesting. I think the main light is a bit too harsh. As you can see, this shadow is a bit too harsh. So I'm looking for something more like this, like an overcast, because I want to control the key light and all of that separately, or customize it. So I need to find something that's a bit more like an overcast. Okay, something like this might be good. And by the way, this is usually what I spend most of my time trying to find the right general atmospheric lighting before I commit to any of the custom lights. All right, I think this is good. This is the alley graffiti, and as you can see, it's kind of like an overcast lighting scenario. Let's go ahead and collapse these now. Great, so that gives me a very broad, diffuse light. So the cast shadow is very, very soft. That's exactly what I want to get started with. And if you look at the eyes, we have a nice reflection as well. And also in the kind of like metallic pieces, we have a bit of more interesting areas here. We can double click this and play with the roughness slightly. All right, so now that we are ready to start lighting things up, this is where I go for the next kind of like variation on the setup or on the workspace. So let's go ahead and right click this one, the first tab the tab that we created. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to call this Pablo Render. Okay, you can call it whatever you want. All right, so the difference between this and this is that the Pablo Render is going to be split into two main areas. So to do that, I'm going to click on this one, this icon right here, and I'm going to set it split vertical. And you can split this horizontally as well. It just really depends on the type of render that you wanted to create. So in my case, this is more of a portrait render, kind of like a vertical render. So it works like this. And what I want to do is create a new camera, which is going to be my render camera. So let's do that first. I'm going to collapse that, and I'm going to click on this icon right here, and I'm going to double click and call this one render. Okay, so on one side, we're going to have my render camera. So I'm going to go for this one. And on the right-hand side, I'm going to have the main camera. So for this, we can just change the quality to maybe gray. And that way, I can move things around independently from the camera. All right, great. So now I'm going to take the camera. So I'm going to select this render camera. You can click on this icon to bring in the properties of that. And I want to have a couple of things. I want to make sure that the set frame is enabled so that I can see literally what the camera sees. And I'm going to make sure that the frame opacity is set to 1. So everything else is black. Obviously, this is not what I want. This is a widescreen render. So I'm going to change that straight away. I'm going to go back to the render tab here. And let's go where it says output on the image. And you see we have this resolution. So 1920 by 1080 is what you see here. Let's switch this to 180 by 1920. Actually, I'm going to increase this a bit. So 1500 by 2000. Let's try this again. Okay, so that's a little bit better. So it's not like full portrait mode, but it sort of shows you the entirety of that side or split screen. So now that I have this, I can click on this arrow and I can just increase the resolution. So this is kind of like a 4K type of thing. We're going to talk about this in just a second, but now we have that frame and we will be able to find the right camera angle. Okay. Now, the other thing that is very important when it comes to the camera and try to find the final render is the field of view, right? Or essentially how much distortion there is with the perspective. So here in the field of view, again, if you select the properties of that camera, you can change that field of view. right? So if you push that forward, when you get closer, it's going to be really distorted, which could be like a really cool effect, depending what you want to render again. I like something flatter, so I'm going to go for something like this. You can also change the millimeters of the lens of the camera. So in my case, I'm going to go for 85. Okay, so 85, that gives me kind of like a flatter perspective. So you can see a little bit of what's on the right-hand side. You can see a little bit of the ears popping at the back of the head. So I think this one gives me a good starting point. All right, so now let's move on to the lighting. So for the lighting, we already have the base, but we don't have any storytelling with the light. And I think that's a very important thing. So what I like to do is just simply create a new light, and I'm gonna go for a spotlight, and I'm gonna click on it, and I'm gonna call it key light. All right, now to be able to properly see that key light in the right-hand side, I'm gonna press the Control U so that I can see the UI, remember? So that is my light in there. It's just right next to the camera. So if I select that and press the W key on my keyboard, when I move it, by the way, the W key is this one right here. So I just select that from here to here. So you can just do that. So that is the light. You can see as I move it on the right-hand side, it moves in here. One little trick that I like to use when setting these type of things is, in order to at least see exactly what the contribution of this light is to turn off the sky. So I'm gonna turn that off in here. And now all you see in the render is the contribution of this light. All right, that's it. So that is kind of like the key of this tutorial. You set up your workspace, you set up your materials and render, or like camera, sorry, and then you just focus on creating the lights for the purpose of whatever you want to achieve with that. So lighting is very, very important because it can literally make or break your final render, or all the time that you spend creating something, it could be totally ruined if the lighting doesn't really work. So that is the purpose of this tutorial. I'm going to show you how simple this lighting setup can be and how effective it can be, regardless of the character that you use. So the next trick that I'm going to show you is that rather than moving the camera around and then just pushing this forward and maybe rotating it, which by the way is with the letter E, doing this type of stuff, what you can do instead is look through the actual light. So in here on the right-hand side, this is the reason we have two split screen. I'm going to click on camera on the dropdown, and instead of going for cameras, I'm going to go for lights, and I'm going to click on key light. So now this circle that you see here is literally what this light is lighting up. So in here, we can just increase the brightness. Again, I like to do that just so that we can see things a little bit better. You can increase the diameter of that of the light itself. So let's go ahead and move it here. Maybe it's a little bit too strong. Let's do it in here. And I'm just, by the way, I'm just moving the one on the right-hand side. And we can just, again, change the diameter. So the diameter is ultimately going to change that sort of softness of the shadow. So if you want something really, really sharp and really dramatic, maybe something sinister, maybe from the bottom, or whatever you want to go for, that is how you achieve it. I like to have a bit of softness in my key light, something like that. And what I want to try to do is focus on the left-hand side of my character. So in other words, I mean, this is exaggerating things, but this is what's going to be lit up by my key light. All right, so I'm going to find a nice area. You can also change the spot angle as well. So if you want to reach more of the character with this, you can do that, or you can just, laser focus on an area. So the tool is there. All right, I think something like this. I just need to find a good angle. So kind of like a 3/4 lighting setup. If this was a character or a human head, this would be almost equivalent to a Rembrandt pattern. Okay, cool. So that is my key light done. Now let's go ahead and create a fill light. So I'm going to click on the spotlight again, and I'm going to call this fill. And the idea with the fill light is to bring those areas that are in the darkness, back to life. So let's go ahead and turn off the key light for now. And again, this is a very simple trick, not necessarily something that I would leave as is, but I like to increase the brightness and change the color to something really obvious, like a red color. And then I'm going to switch from key to fill light here. So this is my secondary light, and I'm going to go to the left-hand side, right? So you can clearly see what this is doing. I'm going to go for something like this. You can also see it's a very sharp shadow there. So I'm going to increase the diameter quite a bit in this case. And one thing to keep in mind with the fill light is that it usually comes from a broad source. So it could be like an overcast day, kind of like a window or a softbox, that sort of thing. So it just creates that sort of like nice soft shadows. All right, so I think that's good. Let's go ahead and bring in the key so you can see the contribution of that red light just on that side. And of course, that is a little bit too intense, so I'm just gonna set it back to a white color. right? And I can change the brightness. So I'm just gonna push this slightly until I can see what I need, which is this area. Perfect. So you see, it is subtle, but if I turn it off, there is a noticeable difference. All right. Now, another important thing is that I don't want to flatten the kind of like the front of the character. So I can do a couple of things. I can take my fill light, I can push it slightly more to the right, and I can also do the same thing with the key light. So let's push it slightly to the left. Okay. So that gives me a bit more contrast here towards the center of the character. And those are little tweaks that you can do as you progress in your lighting setup. That's it. Those are the main ones. Let's go ahead and wrap this up with another light. I'm going to go to spot, and this time I'm going to call this one edge. You can call this rim or hair light. Doesn't really matter. And this is basically what I use to make the silhouette of the character pop a little bit and create that separation between the character itself and the background. So in this case, let's go for, again, let's try to do the same thing. Just, I think red is fine. And let's go ahead and select that from here. So light, edge. I'm going to turn everything off. And I'm going to move to the back. And I'm going to increase the brightness. And this is pretty much what I want from an edge light. This is a bit too much, but I just want to enhance that silhouette, right? So that it gives me that nice little edge of brightness from here. Let's bring in the rest so that I can see literally what I'm doing. And I think this works. It gives me mostly what I need on this left-hand side. I can already see a bit of that, the tail here. I'm just going to increase the diameter slightly. There we go. So that we have a little bit more coming through in these areas. Great. So now we have the three lights. Let's knock this back down to a white color. And I think the brightness is fine. I can just reduce it slightly. But I think it's fine. You can see the difference between not having an edge light and now having it. And this looks already great. I think it's just that we don't have that ambient light, right? So with this very simple setup of key, fill, and edge light, which is your standard 3-point light setup, you get something that is pretty decent. Now let's bring in the sky. So I'm going to turn this on, and you see how this flattens things slightly. So personally, what I like to do is select my sky and take the brightness of the sky, this one right here, and just push down a little bit. So you can still see some of the areas that are in the darkness, but you can still see that there is some color, a definition. That's what I'm looking for. But the rest is dictated by the main lights. So if I show you, this is the only contribution of that initial sky that we set up, or any sky that you choose. It's very, very basic, just so that you can see that there is something in there. But ultimately, it's the way that you place your key light, your fill light, and your edge light that will actually showcase your model. All right, so to wrap this up, I'm going to do a couple of things to improve this render. So the first one is, let's turn all the lights except the edge. I think this will be a good one, so that we can play around with the translucency, especially for the feathers and maybe for the body. So I'm going to double click on the body. And the reason I left the edge light enabled is because that's the one coming from the back. So the effect of the translucency or the subsurface scattering will be more visible in here. So let's go to material. And in the material, I'm going to go to transmission. Right now, there's nothing in here. So I'm going to click on this dropdown, and I'm going to select this volumetric scattering. All right, so now we have volumetric. So I'm going to push this really, really like to the maximum so that you can see what is happening. So now this guy looks like he's made out of, I don't know, like milk or something translucent or wax. So I'm just going to push this down because it's like a very cool and simple effect, but it's one of those things that can be overdone really easily and things start to look a little bit fake. So my whole attention when I tweak this is in this area where the ears of the character are. So you see, just want to be able to see a little of the translucency in that area, and that's it. So that is good enough. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the feathers. So I'm going to double click on the feathers. I'm going to set these to volumetric scattering. And these ones are very, very thin. So you can see how immediately they change. And they're like stylized sort of feathers, but are thick feathers. They're not like the typical feather, just for the type of creature that I made. So I can push this even more, or I can just reduce that. All right. And those are the type of things that you're going to change once you bring in the rest of the lights. It's just that for this specific effect of the volumetric scattering, the edge light or any light coming from the back is going to make it a lot easier to visualize it. So let's bring in the rest. And then you see you have a little bit of that redness. I'm going to push the scattering of the feathers even more. And what's really cool is that it doesn't have to be that sort of reddish color. You can actually change the color. I'm going to leave it as it is, but you can actually change it for something else. Maybe you're doing a creature that is a weird sci-fi royal prince with blue blood, and that scattering will be more bluish than red. I don't know. I'm gonna select the body and I'm gonna also push that back a bit so I don't get that much of that redness in there. Like I said, it could be a cool effect, but sometimes it can be overdone very, very easily. So I just tend to push it and then just go back a bit. I might also do it with the beak here because it might have that sort of translucency as well. So volumetric scattering, just a tiny bit. There we go. And that is about it. So let's go ahead and do a quick review of the rest of the lights. You see, when you bring the rest of the lights and the sky, that effect becomes a little bit too strong. So again, it's just a matter of double clicking the material or the object with the material and tweak it. That's all I'm doing really. All right, so we have our clean, simple render. The final thing to do would be to actually render it. So I'm gonna show you how that is done. One extra thing that I like to do is select my camera, and this is a personal preference just because I think it makes a bit more cinematic, more realistic, is to enable the focus. And I'm gonna switch these to ray traced, and I'm gonna click on sticky focus. So the sticky focus, you see everything is blurry now, but the sticky focus is good because you can move the camera around and the focus will be in that place that you selected. So with my middle mouse button, I'm gonna click on my character. Usually I just use the eyes or the pupils, and that's gonna be my focal point. And then I can use this slider to push this in and out. And you see, this is kind of like a really strong depth of field or shallow depth of field, very strong blur. So I'm gonna reduce that. Again, this is another really cool effect that can be overused and sometimes it just wrecks things up. So I like to use it, but you know, a subtle use of this is fine. So you see there's a little bit of blurriness here at the back and on the left-hand side, but mostly everything is in focus. So that's what I want. And I think in general, this is a good sort of camera angle, maybe something more on the side, like so. Literally all I wanted to do with that, camera angle correction is to hide this sort of feather that was kind of like sticking almost from the eye. So I'm just gonna hide that in there. All right, perfect. So this is the end in terms of the setup. The final thing obviously is to do the render. So what I want to do is go to the render tab here, and I'm going to keep things very simple, but just in case you use something with translucency or kind of like a glass material, make sure that you increase the transmissions and the bounces as well. But in this case, we don't have anything complicated. If anything, we can increase the transmissions a little bit just for the subsurface, but that's it, right? Now, let's go ahead and scroll to the output. This is your main area for, what you're going to actually export. So I'm going to go for a PNG and I'm going to change this to transparency so that anything that is gray in the background is going to be transparent except the shadow because we are exporting a shadow catcher. So it's going to be really easy to do compositing with this. The next thing is to increase the samples. I usually just go for 512. You can just go crazy with more, but I think 512 is fine. I'm going to leave everything as it is. So this is a pretty decent resolution. The output location is going to be my desktop. And that's it. I'm not going to do anything else except changing the camera because it could be one of those things that is really annoying and you might not understand what is happening. So let me just show you what I mean. If you just work with the main camera here or your working camera, and then you have your final camera and then just hit render, you might just end up with this view. And the reason why is because this is the main camera that was created by default when you open your scene, and this is the render camera that Marmoset is going to render. You see the render camera here? That's the camera that is going to be, output. Unless you go ahead and click on add new camera and hit render. This is the only other camera that we have in the scene. And I'm going to turn off this main camera. Now, what's cool about this is that you can have multiple angles from multiple cameras, close-ups, side shots, whatever you want. You list it all in here with multiple cameras. And then when you click render, it's going to render all those cameras. Another thing, just on a final note, you can render multiple passes. I'm not going to do that, but if you want to, enhance your compositing, you can add things like the depth of field or like the depth mask. You can add a material values like albedo, emissive, all that good stuff. But the final composite is what I need because that's basically what you see here. So ultimately, what you see here is what you get, and that's what I need. So let's go to the render menu here, and I'm going to click on render all images. Now, this is rendering in real time as I talk through this in this video. So you see it's something very, very quick, or it's a render that is a very quick one. Obviously, it depends on the type of computer that you have, but any decent computer nowadays, or even not the most powerful computer, can render a nice ray trace render in Marmoset in just under a minute or so. So here is the final render. And as you can see, it's pretty much what we had in the viewport, just a little bit more polished and sharper. That's it. And this is all transparent. So let me just show you what I'm going to do now. Again, this is kind of like the end of the tutorial, but I do want to show you what to do next, or what the idea would be with this render that has transparency. So here we are in Photoshop, and this is the render with the transparency. I'm gonna go ahead and click on this icon here in Photoshop, and I'm gonna create a solid color. And for that, I'm gonna go maybe for this saturated dark blue, maybe something close to purple, like so. And I'm gonna put that behind the character. All right. So I'm trying to go for kind of like a complementary color to that cyan green color. And I'm gonna do the same thing again. And now I'm gonna duplicate this. I'm gonna drag it in here, and I'm gonna change the color to maybe something a bit brighter and more saturated. Something like that. So I have these two fill colors, and each fill color has a mask. So what I'll do is I'm gonna select the mask of the second one, hold Control and I to invert it. So now it is black. And I'm gonna use the gradient tool. So this one right here with a radial gradient. And I'm gonna make sure that I have the white color selected so I can paint with white. And I'm just gonna go back a bit. And from here, from behind, I'm just gonna drag like so. And you'll see it is very subtle, what I'm trying to do here, but it works really well. So it is a simple gradient. And I'm gonna turn this off for a second. So what I'm doing with this gradient is literally two colors, or a gradient between a darker desaturated color and a brighter one that is slightly more saturated. But this area is creating that sort of halo, if you will, around the character. So it helps to frame that composition a little bit more. That's it. From this, you can just go ahead and do anything that you like maybe bring some levels to increase the brightness of the whole thing, the mid values, or not. But in general, whatever work you did in Marmoset, setting up the lights and all of that, it should be pretty good. So, this is pretty much all there is to it. So this is the base setup that I reuse all the time when I just want to have a clean and solid render that also renders really fast. From here, you can always build up. You can add textures, you can add emissive details, or any more advanced lighting if your render needs it. But if this is all you do, you already are in a really good place. Also, if you're into Blender, I have another video in my channel where I show you a similar approach, all within Blender, keeping things very, very simple. I'll see you there. Cheers.